Hey everyone, Sparks back with another Stellar Blade video, and this is going to be a fun one and also a controversial one. For sure there's going to be disagreements here. So I am doing a ranking of every single boss in the game, including some bosses that aren't even in the actual boss challenge mode. Every single one is going on a tier list. Now, even though I'm doing this in a tier list, kind of just doing it for tier lists because tier lists are fun, so why not? But really this is more of a ranking, but I will be putting them in the order and kind of like laying them out in the classic tier list format. So this is based off of my own personal experience, and that's why this is going to be controversial. Like, you're for sure going to think I have some hot takes here, because this is based on, like I said, my own personal experience. So my criteria here for how I'm ranking these bosses from least difficult to most difficult is how much I struggled on it and what the boss's power level is relative to whatever your power level would be at that point in the game. Okay, because like for instance, if you're like super powered up and you go back and fight an early boss, you're just gonna like beat it incredibly easy, but that doesn't mean that boss is actually easy. So I have to look at it how I would be fighting it with the gear and equipment and stuff that I would have at that point in the game. And then I'm kind of balancing the experience of both normal and hard mode. Okay, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Starting out with the F tier, we have Maelstrom. F tier is basically for bosses that just like, are they even bosses? Like, even the developers apparently don't think this was worth putting in the boss challenge, because Maelstrom is a joke. I am terrible at using the gun. If you guys have watched my streams or any of my other boss videos, go ahead and check out my channel with that. I've uploaded every fight that I've done with a boss. You'll know that I'm bad at the gun, and this you can only fight with the gun. And it was still incredibly easy for me. I don't even know if you can die against this guy. Like, you would literally just have to stand still for like forever, because even when he hits you, he barely does any damage, and his attacks are super easy to avoid. It's a joke. And then going along with the F tier, or in the F tier, is Maelstrom 2. So you have to fight him again in Abyss Lavar, and he's like, I guess, a little more health or something because you're further along in the game. But I mean, he's basically 99% the same. And again, just incredibly easy. You'd almost have to try to lose against this guy. I've done 3 full playthroughs of the game, and I've just never even come close to having any issue with any of these bosses at any point. Okay, so moving up to the D tier, we have Kuel. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but this is the first guard that you fight before you go into Althess Lavar. By the way, spoiler warning for, obviously there's going to be very minor spoiler warnings if you haven't already beaten the game. Keep that in mind. I won't be talking about anything story related, but just some of the bosses are inherently like slight spoilers, so just keep that in mind. Anyway, so Kuel is the kind of, you have to do like a little mini boss challenge against her before you can go into Althess Lavar, and she's pretty easy. It definitely is a test to make sure that you are comfortable with the parry mechanic. It's definitely kind of a check, although honestly, if you've been able to beat some of the other bosses previously, you shouldn't have any issue with this. The only thing that makes her a little tricky is the fact that she can heal. All right, next up we have Behemoth. Now, I was going to put this guy higher on the list initially, but honestly, I realized I've never died against this guy. So again, I've done 3 full playthroughs, and I've beaten all the boss challenge on normal and hard difficulty, and I've actually just always one-shot this guy. Now, he's definitely stronger than some of the other bosses, but compared to what you have to work with by the time you encounter him, he's really not a problem at all. You do have some long-range attacks to dodge that you can't block with his like little wind tornado things. But yeah, honestly, he's just really not much of an issue. Okay, after that we have Shael. Okay, so this is the counterpart to Kuel. This is the second time you have to fight one of these guard girls, and she is guarding Abyss Lavar. Very similar, the mechanics are basically the same, but she has longer combos, and of course, again, can heal. So she is a little tricky if you don't have the timing right, if you're not ready for it. She definitely can beat you up if you're not like pairing all of these combos, because they can be pretty long. And then, of course, got to kind of keep the pressure on, otherwise she does heal quite a bit. Again, not too much of a problem, but is a little trickier than the last time you faced her. Okay, moving on, we have Gigas. Now, Gigas is the last one that's going to be here in the D tier, and this is the first one that people might find surprising. So I beat Gigas on my first playthrough on normal mode on either the second or third try in the skin suit without too much problem. I think it was my second try, and again, I was using the skin suit, and pretty new to the game at this point because, he's like the first Alpha Naytiba that you fight, and he just wasn't that challenging. I went through in hard mode, blew through him in my first try. I've beat him in boss challenge, excuse me, and he's just like never really been an issue. That said, I do know other people have struggled on him. In fact, I've watched other streamers do it on hard mode in particular, and they died many, many times. But something that you guys will notice is that my experience has been very different from a lot of people's. I've gotten so many comments from people being like, oh, I thought this boss was easy, one that I really struggled on, or one that I like blew through. They're like, how did you beat this so quickly? This is so hard. So something about me, I must have a very unique play style. But let's go ahead and move on to the next tier, which is C, and the next hardest boss is going to be Corruptor. Now, if I was purely basing this off of how many times I died to a boss, this guy would probably be even higher on the list. This is one that I know most people found pretty easy, but he is an early boss. You have very little power-ups to work with at this point, and the first time I fought this guy, it was on stream in normal mode, of course, and I died to this guy more times than I would like to admit. He wasn't like an insane challenge, but definitely pushed me at that point in my skill level and what I had to work with Eve. Keep in mind, something that might be reflected in the fact that my experience was pretty different with some of these bosses is that I really don't have that much of a background, okay? Surprisingly, I don't actually play that many video games, and the only other like Soulsborne games that I've played have been Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, and I never even beat Dark Souls 3, and I have played other sort of action games such as Devil May Cry and Final Fantasy 14, Bayonetta, like way back in the day. But anyway, just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. Okay, so after that, the next one would be Corruptor 2, okay? And this is just almost exactly the same fight. He's like a yellow version of him. This is how you can get to the bunny suit in the Wasteland. And I died to this guy again several times. And I think my biggest problem with Corruptor is not realizing that certain moves of his were actually blockable, and I just assumed I had to avoid them. So like his shots and like when he charges at you, which is silly because basically you know something's going to be unblockable and you have to dodge it if he does like the orange thing that flashes up. And I guess it was just early on in the game I didn't like put that together, which is kind of dumb because after you realize this, he definitely becomes easier, but he can still be tricky. Like he does the blink attacks, which are kind of tricky. He does a big AoE that blasts you in the face if you don't get that right. And, he moves quickly. You have to be mobile against the Corruptor. Anyway, let's move on to the next one, and that is Gigas 2. Now, the first time I fought this guy, I actually one-shot him. It wasn't a problem. And I like that, like, it looks like round 2 with the same one, because he still has, like, the bloody damage on his halo and all that. I'm not sure if he's actually supposed to be the same Alpha Naytiba come back or a different boss, but either way, it's cool. He does have a much improved moveset, and I did die to this guy a few times when I went through my hard mode run, but on normal difficulty, I didn't really struggle with him. This is more of me realizing that, like, I got a lot better at the game by this point. He is stronger than the other bosses I mentioned before this, but I actually didn't really struggle on this guy. The thing that I found most tricky was sometimes when he would like jump way up and like the camera flips up, and so it's hard to time things right when he lands. Any bosses that like whip the camera up for like a cinematic effect or whatever definitely trip me up, and I think that's kind of a little bit of a poor part of the game's design. It would be better if they just like zoomed out or something if they're trying to keep it all on frame. Also, when he kind of charges at you with like his shoulder and his head, just kind of like digs through the dirt a little bit, that would often catch me off guard as well. Okay, moving on up to the B tier. And this is where I think the bosses are getting, definitely much more legit. The first one we have is Taki. Now, Taki is another boss that I actually haven't really struggled with much Personally, I beat her on my second try, I believe, on my initial playthrough, and beat her pretty easily in boss challenge and on hard mode. I think I also beat her on my second try there. So from that perspective, I should be putting her lower on this list because she just didn't offer me that much of a challenge. But I think Taki definitely is sort of a mid point in the game where she's testing different skills and your knowledge, right? So she has both ranged attacks and she has very quick close-up attacks. Now, for whatever reason, I just never found the timing of her attacks difficult, and so I was able to pretty easily parry all of them, but I could see some people having a difficult time with this. She will quickly break through your shield because of the rapidness of her attacks if you're not parrying. So if you're not used to that, you could take a lot of damage from her. Also, be aware, she can push you off the edge, which I found out the hard way. It's funny because I was just like holding my block and I was right at the edge and she literally just pushed me off. Like she cheesed me. It was hilarious. Also, she can do the teleport thing, which is something that you haven't seen yet before at that point in the game that will kind of prepare you for some bosses in the future that do the same thing. She has two fairly different phases and it's just a really super badass fight. Okay, the next one is going to be Brute. Now, I'm not talking about the like tutorial Brute where it doesn't matter if you actually beat them or not. I'm not really even counting that as a boss fight, but this is where you find the Brute in the Forbidden Area. And he is fairly tricky. I actually died to him several times, mostly because he just has really huge unblockable AoEs that he starts kind of like midway through the battle. And you either have to be really far away, make sure you're ready to dodge, because he just gets the big flaming hands and he can really start pummeling you and they're hard to avoid. Again, I did die to him at least a few times before I fought him, and I think he is a pretty powerful optional boss. Oops, little jump cut here. I actually forgot to talk about Abaddon. I didn't have him on the list here. So, topping off our D tier is Abaddon. This is the first major boss you fight. You definitely get practice with him if you fought him in the demo before the game came out. He's a really cool boss fight. I think he's actually a lot of fun, and you fight him later on in the game as well. He is pretty difficult. I think if you've never played one of these kind of games before, if you're pretty new to these, he definitely offers a challenge, but he's not overwhelming. I died to him several times because, it is the initial boss fight and it kind of like sets the tone for the game. I actually think he is more difficult than like the Gigas that you fight later on. I think it's because you just have more to work with by the time you're fighting the Gigas. And Abaddon can like rain down lightning bolts, which are often pretty hard to avoid. And he can also do the big jumping thing where the camera kind of changes angle and it's hard to make sure you time your dodge correctly with that as well. All right, after Brute, we have the Abaddon 2 fight, and you fight him at the top of a building in the Great Desert, and he is significantly stronger than the last time that you fought him. He moves pretty quick with a lot of repeated combo attacks. He'll like follow up lightning in various ways, both calling it down from the sky and shooting at you. He has some new variations to his combos, and he can definitely hit pretty hard and challenge you, depending on how well you're prepared at this point in the game. If you've like really built yourself up, he might not be too bad, but if you haven't done as much of the optional content, I could definitely see him just annihilating you with a couple of attacks. So keep that in mind. I lost him a couple times, and I don't remember exactly how many tries it took me. Not too many, but I think he is worthy here of being right here in the middle of our B tier. Okay, after Abaddon 2, there is Stalker. Now, Stalker is another really fun fight, and I just had a lot of practice fighting him from the demo. I did the boss challenge a lot, and never got a 0 damage run on him, but almost. I was close to it. It was easy to beat him in the skin suit. I got very, very practiced against him. Probably most of us did, and I think he deserves to be up here. Now, when I actually went through the real game, I beat him super easy, right? Just because I had so much practice against him. But thinking about, if you did not have that much practice or how challenging he was when I first did the boss challenge in the demo, he definitely deserves to be up here, potentially even higher on the list, but I think I'm going to put him right here after Abaddon 2. And then directly after Abaddon 2, you have Stalker 2. So this is another boss that you find in the Great Desert, and not an optional boss, though. You will have to fight this guy before you can activate the Solar Tower, and he's significantly powered up from the first Stalker. He moves fast, has a lot of like long reach. He's super mobile. He'll dodge a lot of your like burst attacks because they take a little moment to go off, and sometimes he'll just like dig underground and be out of there before you can even hit him. He does repeated swipes, some like very immediate, and then kind of follow up with ones that have a delay. So it can be a little bit tricky to get the right timing on parries with him, and just another really cool fight, and he does hit pretty hard. Okay, moving on, we have the A tier, and this is where I think things are really starting to ramp up to be like legit challenges, probably even if you are a little more experienced with games like this. And the first one in the A tier is Belial. Now, Belial, I actually beat on the second try, and I want to say one of the only reasons that I beat him, that I didn't beat him the first time, was because I didn't realize he had so many phases. So he will heal twice and make you go through 3 full health bars of beating him, and he kind of gets progressively more difficult as the fight goes on. I think he probably caught a lot of people off guard, and technically he has a 4th phase in a way because you fight him before that, kind of like halfway through the area before you get to the true boss battle where he has 3 phases. It's, honestly, his moveset isn't like super crazy. You want to just keep the pressure on, stay close to him, and you shouldn't have too much trouble. And this is the one boss battle where the first time I did my playthrough, I used Tacky Mode because I've never used Tacky Mode before, and then I just like completely cheesed his 3rd phase, and that kind of made me decide, all right, I'm not going to use Tacky Mode again because I just felt like it's really cheap. It definitely lowers the difficulty of almost anything in this game when you use Tacky Mode. But Belial, I think, is, just by the fact that you have to chew through so much health, puts him well onto the A tier. Okay, after that, we have Providence. Now, this is probably my most hot take yet. I know a lot of people have said that Providence is the hardest boss for them in the game, and they think he's, more difficult than like basically any other boss or anything else that I'm going to have here on the tier list later on, but I just didn't find him difficult. I almost beat him on my very first try and then beat him on the second try, and then when I went through hard mode and did the boss challenge, I died to him a couple times and won. One of the things that to me made him really easy was that his attacks are just slow. They're very slow and deliberate, which means it's very easy to parry them. You just kind of like stay in front of them, keep the pressure on, and he's just not going to be able to do that much. Parry his normal attacks a couple times, hit him with a beta, parry a couple normal attacks, hit him with a beta. Now, when he changes to the second phase, he has the like instant kill possibility, but that has never gone off against me. The fact that they are sort of stacked vertically, so you're looking at them all on like a flat plane in front of you, makes it much easier to hit than some of the ones in the other battles, like the Unidentified Naytiba and the Elder Naytiba later on. He stays a lot closer to you. Now, he can do a lot of damage. The laser that he comes out and kind of scorches the earth with can kind of catch you off guard, but honestly, if I was going purely by how many tries it took me, this guy would be even lower on the list. But I think there are things that can just like almost, one shot you or hit you in 2 hits if you're not prepared for it. So the fact that he does hit really hard puts him up here a lot higher on the list. Okay, after that we have the Juggernaut. Juggernaut was one that I did die to several times, and he is a really unique boss with a couple things that make him difficult. The first thing is just the fact that the area is really dark, and then in the second phase, when he starts lighting things on fire, the contrast makes it really hard to see sometimes, which I'm not sure is really the best way of adding difficulty, but it is a realistic kind of effect that you would have, because your eyes would get blinded by the fire, and then it would be even harder to adjust and see things in the dark. So that is kind of cool. You have to be careful just to like run around, not take environmental damage by standing in the fire, and he has an extremely long reach. It's really hard to be away from his reach, and he will actively try and keep you away from him. So you want to close the gap and get as close to him as you can to negate his reach advantage, but if you stay close to him attacking him for too long, he'll do a headbutt to push you away. So kind of a really cool like push-pull mechanic there. Also, a lot of his attacks have a long windup and delay, so it can be really hard or tricky to time your parries correctly against him. All right, after Juggernaut is Raven. Now, Raven is one that I know many people consider to be the hardest or second hardest boss in the game, and she just wasn't for me. Honestly, this is another boss kind of similar to Providence, where if I was purely going off of how many tries it took me on my first run, she'd be much lower on the list because I actually one-tapped her on my first playthrough. She is very unique in that she disappears and teleports a lot. So you can't necessarily see her attacks coming, and she attacks rapidly and relatively long combos. But I guess, I don't know, for myself, I kind of specialize in parrying. I've gotten very, very good at it, and I tend to underuse the dodge, to be honest, and my weakness is much more the blink. So the one thing that did make her a little trickier is the fact that she will do a double blink, where you'll have to time the first one correctly, and then she'll actually do another one directly after, and so if you don't time that one correctly, she'll end up slamming your face into the ground, so watch out for that. But for whatever reason, I just found the timing of her attacks to be very consistent and easy, and she would rarely actually land those attacks on me. Now, I did struggle a little bit more with her on hard mode. She is a unit that because she attacks an enemy because she attacks so many times, you can end up being worn down because, the fact that she has so much more health, all the bosses do, health and shields in hard mode, you have to be like parry for forever, and so it just can end up wearing you down, and so it did make her a lot harder on hard mode. Okay, now we are moving on to the S tier, and these are the ones that were like really true challenges for me, and I think that most people probably found these bosses quite challenging as well, whether it was on the normal with their first playthrough or in hard mode. And the first one in S tier is Karakuri. This boss, in theory, I don't know, didn't seem like it was going to be that hard, but I actually took several times to beat it for the first time. It was easier for me on hard mode, I think, because at that point I'm just like pretty equipped out and I already had the boss figured out, which is a shame because a lot of the bosses end up being almost easier on hard mode just because your knowledge, as a player, you've leveled up, which I guess is kind of cool in a way because, even though the boss is stronger, like you really know what you're doing. And so, you're the one that leveled up, not your character. Although Eve does get a lot stronger with the Mark II of the Exospines. Anyway, Karakuri, the thing that's tricky about her is the unblockable laser that will do a full 360 and hit the room. Basically, you need to jump over it. It's extremely hard to time an actual dodge with it. So before I got the jump timing correctly, that hit me pretty often. And then she can spawn a lot of adds. So you need to be saving your AoEs, probably most of the time a burst attack. So when it spawns those, you can wipe them out pretty quickly. If you don't, they can get in a lot of damage and just distract you from the main boss and be a lot harder. The next one on the S tier is going to be the third Corruptor battle, and this time it has a friend with one of those other horse enemies. And this is really tricky, because even if you didn't have that much of a problem with Corruptor like I did, the fact that you have both of them, and they're both highly mobile, is really tricky. You definitely want to focus on the littler enemy first to take it out as soon as you can, and then focus on the Corruptor. But that said, the other one doesn't actually go down that fast, so it takes a decent amount of time. The trick that I found that made this fight a lot easier was just not using the lock-on. That way I could freely move around, I could see everything around me, know when I needed to run away, and just like stay super mobile and not get too focused on trying to like take down the smaller enemy too quickly. Because if I ended up like doing a bunch of combos on it, then the Corruptor would come up and hit me with a big attack. So just stay mobile, be patient, take out the smaller boss, and then you can focus on Corruptor. This ended up not being as hard for me by the time I fought it as I actually had with the initial Corruptor, but that's just because I had gotten way, way better at the game. And this is something that is a very unique and tricky boss battle because there's no other boss battle where you're fighting two enemies at the same time. Okay, finishing off our S tier, we have the Democrawler slash Demogorgon, although the actual Demogorgon fight is mostly just like a little quick time event that isn't too hard. But the Democrawler is quite challenging, and one that I consistently got comments on from other people agreeing with me that it was one of the harder bosses in the game. Now, eventually, I found, kind of the right way to fight it. You always want to close the gap. You always want to be as close to it as possible, particularly like, when it changes to the second phase, it'll do like a ton of like these big light attacks, kind of similar to how Abaddon actually has attacks like that. But it will have more of them, harder to avoid ones, and it can just really be hard to avoid a lot of its attacks. I died to this more times than probably any other boss the first time that I fought it. And it really starts to feel like you're playing like a Dark Souls game or something like that when you're starting to fight the Democrawler. And I think beyond the last two here that we're going to have in our God tier, Democrawler is the most challenging boss in the game, particularly for me. In particular, I thought it was really, really hard. It felt good to finally beat it. Okay, now we have our God tier, okay? And to me, these last two bosses are just dramatically harder than any other boss in the game. And the first one is going to be, or the second to hardest boss is going to be the Unidentified Naytiba. Oh my gosh, this boss killed me so many times on both normal and hard mode. It's just really, really hard, okay? She has sort of medium length combos that I got pretty good at parrying, and it's not too bad, but ideally the strategy is to just like not actually worrying about parrying too many attacks. So sometimes she'll just do some normal like 1-2 slash, and you definitely want to parry those. But when she goes into her longer combos, you actually just want to try and stop those with a burst, or you can stun her by hitting her with a shotgun if you want to do that. You don't have a burst ready, a beta attack. And just stop it from happening, because she will do a combo that's like 5 attacks long, and you can parry those, but then sometimes she'll just follow it up within an unblockable slash, and it's really tricky. I had a hard time like avoiding that last unblockable attack, and it's definitely something that can wear you down over time because the fight is fairly lengthy. Another thing that's tricky about her is that she will sometimes jump up and kind of stun you, and again, it's another one of those things that like whips the camera, and then she'll dive bomb you later on. And the timing on this is also tricky. It's really hard to do an actual dodge, and you want to actually jump. It's the easiest way to avoid that attack, but it's kind of tricky. You got to get the jump timing exactly right, otherwise you're going to take damage from it, because it's also like a fairly large AoE. And then the thing that really tripped me up is the instant kill attack. So this is the first boss you encounter that has an instant kill attack, and you have to destroy these 3 orbs around her, otherwise it'll, again, just wipe you. It'll kill anything on the field. No matter where you are, you can't dodge it. It doesn't matter. But while you're shooting them, she's also sending out these beams of light that are like extremely hard to avoid as well. And the longer it takes you to shoot the little orbs, the more of these things are going to be hitting you. And this is really, really tricky. And again, the shooting mechanic is what I am worst at in the game, and being forced to interact with that under pressure of being hit by these big light attacks, but I have to take them out, otherwise I'm going to instant die, was really, really, really hard. Definitely what finally helped me on this was increasing the sensitivity, so aiming quicker became a lot easier. Also, you want to make sure you're not locked onto the boss, otherwise it's also very, very hard to actually shoot at the orbs, because it's going to be naturally kind of trying to target the boss floating there in the center. A very, very challenging fight. And again, this is a boss that really, really challenged me both on my initial normal run playthrough and on hard mode and going through the boss challenge. Another thing that makes her basically like doing the boss challenge even in the normal playthrough is that there's no other Naytibas or anything to interact, so you cannot build up like your burst or beta gauges when you go in to fight her like you can with a lot of other bosses, which is a way to kind of like make other bosses easier if you need to do that. Okay, number 1, the hardest boss in the game to me by far is the Elder Naytiba, which is very appropriate. Now, depending on what decisions you made during the game, you might not even fight this guy. But the Elder Naytiba is extremely difficult. He has 3 phases. The first one's very easy. You fight him in his form as Adam, and then you fight him kind of as like the initial stage of being an Elder Naytiba, and then he changes forms again into this like glowing light version of him and gets even more powerful. And there are multiple things that make this guy really, really difficult, and to me is actually the hardest boss I've ever fought in any game in my entire gaming experience. Now, he has very long combos that can combine the purple blink, the blue blink, and unblockable attacks, and it's really difficult to time all of these. He also has the teleport thing, so the parrying time can be tricky because you don't see the attacks coming. You just have to like count it out to make sure you're doing the correct timing on it. He also has the instant death attack, very similar to the Elder, or to the unidentified Naytiba, but he has 6 floating cherubs that you have to destroy instead of just 3 boxes or orbs of light, and they're also moving around as you have to try and shoot them. He has multiple long range attacks, and he really punishes you for trying to quickly close the gap, because oftentimes he'll just throw a light spear in your face if you try and rush him with like the triangle rush attack. And he has so much health on hard mode. It's very, very tricky. And even on normal difficulty, this guy is very, very hard. And on hard mode, I had to end up breaking out Tacky mode. I probably would still be trying to beat this guy if I was not using Tacky mode. It's very, 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 very hard. I had to use all of the tools that the game makes available to you. And like I said, I think this guy is a true high level boss challenge that would challenge almost any gamer. That said, I have gotten comments on my Elder Naytiba fight with people saying that they found Providence much more difficult, which is just totally opposite of my experience. Let me know what you think of these rankings. Here is the final tier list for easiest to most difficult bosses in Stellar Blade. The game is a lot of fun. I really liked the challenging gameplay, and yeah, hopefully we'll get a Stellar Blade 2 again. I'll probably still put out a few more Stellar Blade videos if we get more DLC and more content. Maybe some final thoughts as like a little mini game review, things like that. Subscribe for more Stellar Blade, Nikke, and all of the great Shift Up content. And I will catch you guys in the next video or stream.